Hello, I am Dr. Caleb Lund. Welcome to my channel. Herb Daddy is a passion project of mine. I'm currently a professor in the Department of Botanical Medicine at Vassar University. I come from a very traditional science background with a bachelor's in biochemistry and philosophy, a master's in chemistry, and a PhD in toxicology. Additionally, I have extensive postgraduate training in Western herbalism and have practiced as a clinical herbalist. I've been teaching pharmacognosy, pharmacology, dietary supplement regulations, and natural products research for over 17 years. And I've been doing basic science and preclinical research for well over 25 years. I love chemistry and I love plants. This channel is an expression of both of those passions. I operate from the paradigm that many plants are and can be used as medicine, that many plants have real biological activity in the human body beyond providing nutrients. This can range from toxic to beneficial. I believe that human cultures from around the world have developed rational medical systems throughout history, and that traditional knowledge about plants is reasonable and worthy of our consideration. Just because knowledge is old doesn't mean it's automatically false. I also believe in the scientific process, the actual philosophical practice of science. Making a hypothesis and testing it using scientifically validated methods. I believe that properly designed and well-executed studies can help us better understand how things work. However, I also understand that the modern scientific process is problematic, wrought with funding biases, publication biases, generative AI, negative data biases, politics, you name it. So, we still must be very careful in how we use it to make decisions. Neither traditional knowledge nor modern scientific inquiry are perfect. As consumers of this information, we have to work very hard to sift through the immense amount of knowledge and misinformation swirling around us. This channel is my attempt at cutting through the noise in the topics for which I am an expert. I have no agenda. I just think plants create amazing chemistry and that sometimes we can use that chemistry to our benefit or bane. I will offer my opinion based on my understanding of traditional knowledge and modern research on herbs and herb constituents. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. Basically, I'm just a nerdy old guy that loves plant chemistry. If that's your thing, welcome. Now, let's talk about the levels of evidence I will be using in my videos, or more broadly, the type of evidence you might use to decide whether or not to use a supplement. I think it's worth sitting on that point for a moment so that this information is more practical for you. How do you decide whether or not to put something in your body? Something that could potentially have permanent health consequences. Most of us would think fairly carefully about getting a tattoo, sit with the idea for a while, play with some designs, hopefully research the meaning behind the design so we don't end up with some nonsense or something offensive. Personally, I feel like we should have the same consideration for things we're putting in our body. We live in a pretty miraculous time. Compared to history, our food chain is quite safe, and poisoners are mostly a thing of the past. So most of us feel pretty comfortable just putting things in our mouth and swallowing them down. Maybe I was a little too dramatic. It's not likely that some random herb will cause permanent damage to you, but it's not out of the question. So again, how do you decide whether or not to put something in your body? Here is my list in order from lowest to highest quality of evidence. It's not exhaustive, but it hits most of the main types of evidence you run across with herbs. The first and lowest form of evidence, in my opinion, is also the one many people rely on the most. These would be anecdotes and personal experiences. This includes social media influencers telling you how they changed their life by taking supplement X. We are social creatures after all, and our brains are hardwired into accepting knowledge from people we perceive as having status. But I need you to practice the habit of stepping back and recognizing the reality. You have no idea who this person actually is, whether or not they're actually doing what they say they're doing, what it is they're actually taking, what their motivations are. You don't know if the conditions they have are what they say it is, and you don't know if they actually got better. You really don't know anything other than this person is trying to convince you to do or take something. With that mindset, how comfortable do you feel about following their instructions now? Parasocial psychology is very interesting, and all of us are scrambling to fight our evolutionary instincts in the era of social media and artificial intelligence. But we must stay vigilant when it comes to our health. Anecdotes are a bit more meaningful when they come from people you actually know, when you have a bit more information about what's been going on with them and their history for being truthful or not. This is also a very powerful influence in our decision making. If your best friend said that their life changed when they started taking an herb, you'd probably be willing to try it. But this is just another level of the personal experience, and so let's talk about that. Personal experiences are a little bit better in that you at least know yourself, I would hope, and you'll have some level of evidence for how you feel before and after. The problem with personal experiences is that we have extremely powerful minds which can do some pretty miraculous things that science just doesn't understand yet. What I'm talking about is the placebo effect and the magic of psychosomatic influence. This is when our minds change how our body is working and can even change the symptoms of a disease or even the disease itself. We really don't know how this happens, but we've seen it enough to know that it's possible. So if you've convinced yourself that taking this herb or supplement or drug will change your life, your mind may make it true whether or not it's actually doing something at a chemical or biological level. For you, this is amazing. And as a healer, I am thrilled when this happens. I don't necessarily care how you got better as long as you get better. But as a scientist, all I can say is that this helped you in some way. I can't definitively say how or if it will help other people. This is the same for those anecdotes that come from people you know. Yes, they got better, but is it because the thing helped or did they experience the placebo effect? We just can't know for certain, and this is where the other levels of evidence come in. It would be great if we could intentionally tap into this power of our mind, but so far we have no way of particularly accessing it. We just know it's possible and need to be aware of it in our personal experiments and in research. Traditional and historical information is next on my list. For me, this ranks higher because it represents the collective opinion and experience of a lot of people over a long period of time. Having one person say an herb works for them is one thing, but having entire cultures with countless observations over hundreds or thousands of years carries a bit of weight. Modern science doesn't hold a very high opinion of this level of evidence, but in herbalism, it's a very important part of our knowledge. And as I said earlier, I believe humans were still rational beings back in time. We may not have had all the tools and understanding that we have now, but people still got sick, and healers still tried to do their best to help them get better. History wasn't filled with shysters trying to pull one over on us. There were people facing the same problems and doing their best to get through them. So I put some stock in this level of evidence. Traditional knowledge is so critical to herbalism because the modern scientific paradigm doesn't really support researching herbs at a large scale, at least in the United States. There are regulatory reasons behind this, but it's mostly financial. So for many of the plants herbalists use, this is the best we have. The main thing that's missing from traditional and historical information is our modern powers of diagnosis, our ability to determine what is going wrong and whether or not we are really making a difference. This has improved dramatically over the years. So when reading historical information, we have to be careful about assuming that they are talking about the same disease, or even if the treatment resolution was significant or not. When utilizing traditional and historical information, it's better to focus on the patterns of symptoms rather than specific diseases, and appreciate that small changes in someone's health can still be meaningful. We're used to powerful drugs in the modern age, so our expectations can sometimes be pretty high. But historically, if an herb had a modest effect on someone's health, it could be viewed as a life changer, especially in chronic diseases. In some ways, we also have to be careful about the identity of the herb they're talking about in traditional literature. Botany has also changed a lot over time, and what a plant was called in 1400s England or 200 BCE Greece probably isn't the same as what we call it today. So we have to be careful about ascribing a plant's historical use to a plant of the same name today. These issues have mostly been shaken out over the years, so we don't have to worry about them as much, but it's something to keep in mind. Next on my list is preclinical research. I debated with myself whether to put this one before or after traditional knowledge, but for now it's here. Maybe we can say they're tied for third place. Preclinical research is research done using animals or cell culture. As far as herbs are concerned, this is when we give animals or expose cells to plants or plant extracts and observe how it affects them biologically. The nice thing about preclinical research is that it is the whole plant or extract interacting with a true biological system. So it's a scientific way to see if an herb actually does anything biological. Importantly, it can also help to show whether or not the traditional information we have on an herb is plausible. Traditionally, milk thistle was used to help protect the liver, and modern preclinical experiments have shown that indeed it protects rat livers from damage caused by carbon tetrachloride and other hepatotoxins. Similar experiments using human liver cells also showed the same thing. So maybe the traditional information is onto something. The other great thing about preclinical research is that we get to tease out how things work, the mechanism of action that us science folks get excited about. Animal and cell culture models allow us to dive really deep into the biochemical pathways to determine how something works at a physiological level. Due to ethics, it's difficult to get this sort of information anywhere else. The downside to preclinical research is that these just aren't humans. Even though humans and rats share about 90% of their genes, that 10% makes a big difference. This is true for most other organisms too. There are just too many differences in the pharmacokinetics between rats and humans. What I mean by this is that when a rat ingests or is administered a drug or herb, the way that drug moves around in their body and how it is changed by their physiology is usually quite different from how the same drug or herb works in us. So what we see in a rat or mouse doesn't always translate to what we see in a human being. With cell culture, it's a similar problem. Even if we use human cells that share 100% of the genes as human, cells growing in a dish just aren't the same as the cells growing in our body. Our cells are in constant communication with their neighbors and receiving signals from other tissues. When we pull them out of that environment and plop them in a dish, the cells behave quite a bit differently. The other issue is related to what I said earlier. When you ingest a drug or herb, that substance goes through extensive digestive and metabolic processes. So what your heart or liver sees is quite a bit different than what you swallowed. There's some creative ways to get around this, like using liver microsomes or organs on a chip, but it's pretty rare in the literature, especially with herbs. With all that in mind, we have to be very careful in how we interpret preclinical data. At its best, it represents a potential outcome, but we still need to test it in whole humans in order to see if it actually works. This is true for beneficial and toxic effects, and for herbs and pharmaceutical drugs. Next is clinical research. This is where we finally put humans and the scientific process together. In the case of herbs, this means that we're going to have real people take the herbs to see if it has a verified biological effect in humans. This is the type of evidence we want. There's a lot of ways to do clinical research, some more meaningful than others. The gold standard is what we call a randomized controlled trial, or RCT, which is where we take a group of people and randomize them to either a treatment, herb in this case, or a placebo. Sounds pretty simple, but there are many ways to mess this up and get it wrong. The whole point of clinical research is to establish causality, but when you take a complex human and a complex botanical medicine, there are a lot of variables that make this a tricky process. So the value of clinical research all comes down to study design and proper interpretation of the results, which is much too big of a topic for this video. I'll make another video on how to design good clinical trials using herbs. Subscribe so you can watch it when I do. When they are done well, clinical trials finally give us that satisfying validation that an herb works in a human being, or at least the humans in that trial. Again, there's lots of nuance to interpreting clinical research, and a lot of people in social media get it wrong, especially with herbs. In the case of herbs and clinical research, there's a numbers problem too. By numbers, I mean financial. Botanical medicines and plants can't really be patented, so it's difficult to recoup the costs of doing clinical trials, which are very expensive. Also, in the United States, supplement companies are disincentivized to do research on their products because doing so could give the impression that they're trying to make drug claims. As a result of all this, there aren't as many clinical trials with herbs, and the ones that do exist are usually small and underpowered. Still, there are some good ones out there, and I'll highlight them when I can. The last and most powerful type of evidence is systematic reviews and meta-analyses. This is when we take a body of clinical evidence about an herb and pool it together to see if there appears to be a real effect. If the studies are done similar enough and the data can be pooled and reanalyzed as a larger group to really suss out the actual effects, this is called a meta-analysis. The benefit of systematic reviews is that it takes data from different labs involving all sorts of people. This increases the power of the evidence and allows us to say more confidently that an herb will work for the average person. It is really satisfying when we can do this with botanical medicines, but in all honesty, it's rare. First, because of what I mentioned earlier, there aren't many high-quality clinical trials with most herbs due to funding issues and lack of incentives. And second, there's a very unique issue with herbs that many people don't realize, and that is there are thousands of ways to prepare and extract plant medicines, as well as high variability in plants in general. So oftentimes, it's difficult to pool the data from existing clinical trials because the treatment materials are different in each trial. For example, you may want to see if calendula is good for treating burns, so you start to pool the data from existing trials and find one that uses a water extract to make a cream, and another uses an oil extract to make a salve. They both use calendula, so no problem, right? Well, not really when it comes to plants. Remember, plants contain hundreds of different chemicals. Some are water-soluble, and some are not, and there are many in between. So even though these studies started with the same plant, the actual treatments, cream or salve, ended up very different and likely contain different plant constituents. Because the treatments are different, these two studies shouldn't be pulled together in a meta-analysis. Unfortunately, even experienced researchers don't realize this distinction, and it ends up muddying the waters as far as herbs and efficacy. As you can see, it can get very nuanced with herb research. So that's my order. Number 1, systematic reviews and meta-analysis. 2, clinical research. 3, traditional information and preclinical research. 4, personal experiences. And 5th, anecdotes. All of these types of evidence come together to paint a picture of whether or not an herb is safe and effective, and influence my decision to use that herb or recommend it to other people. For this channel, depending on the plant or constituent I'm talking about, I will utilize all of these sources and will try to be transparent about which one I'm using so that you can investigate the herb for yourself. Please remember, nothing I say on this channel should be used as medical advice. Please consult with your healthcare team about anything you decide to use on yourself. So, welcome to Herb Daddy. I will try to upload videos as often as I can, but I am a busy professor, so be patient with me. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you'd like to know when stuff comes up. I'm very excited to explore the world of medicinal plant chemistry with you.